Hey watch friends, today we're going to take a look at the latest offering from the micro brand Batavi, and this is their Geograaf. Do note up front, this is a prototype that was loaned to this channel for review, so if you see scratches, scuffs, etc., it can be attributed to that. Additionally, I do want to mention right off the bat, this one is currently live on Kickstarter as of publishing. We had some shipping delays, so it was a little bit late getting here. That being said, July 26th of 2022 is the end, so if you decide that you're interested in picking one of these up, and I think many of you will be, do definitely check that out. I will have a link down in the description. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into this particular offering. First, looking at the pouch. The pouch is similar construction to what we've seen in some other offerings from Second Hour and otherwise. The texture is a little bit different, but overall it's a zipper hard case construction, and it does hold two watches. I think it's nicely done. As for the watch itself, this comes standard with Batavi's 2-year warranty, so you have some peace of mind and backing to go along with that. As far as the specs, on my calipers, measuring from roughly the 3 to 9 or also the 2 to 8, this is coming in at 39.2 millimeters. And as we'll see throughout, because of having the fixed bezel, I think it still has a good bit of wrist presence, so even if you have a larger wrist, I wouldn't be too scared off by the smaller size, somewhat, relatively speaking there. And then with the bezel, as you can see here, it is a virtually flush bezel. I couldn't measure an appreciable difference on that, so we'll just call the bezel flush. The lugs are going to be a strap change friendly 20 millimeters, and as we'll see, they do have quick release spring bars as well. The lug to lug is a nice wrist versatile 48.1 millimeters. So I think everybody will be pretty much satisfied with that. As far as the thickness, the total thickness is coming in at 12.9 millimeters, and that is including this double dome sapphire crystal. As we'll talk about, this does have inner AR coating. However, as is pretty much always the case with double dome, you can't ever really have enough AR coating to minimize all the glare. As you can see, it doesn't completely wash out when we pick up light and reflectivity. However, certainly the glare is almost always ever present, so do be aware of that as we go through, but we'll look at some better outdoor footage as well. As for the movement, this is a first for the channel. This one has the Swiss Soprod C125. And that is, in case you're not familiar with it, which I personally was not particularly familiar with the detailed specs, that does have hacking. It is going to be capable of hand winding, automatic style movement, of course. It has a 42-hour power reserve. Additionally, it does have a bidirectional rotor, so that's nice, unlike the Miota movements, where the winding is unidirectional. You can get the fast rotor spin. So overall, it's a well-spec'd movement. I might have mentioned it is high beat as well, so 28,800 beats per hour. As far as the water resistance, this, despite the overall styling being, I would say, somewhat on the dressier side, still comes with 200 meters or 20 atmospheres of water resistance, so solid there. As far as the weight, size to my 6.5-inch wrist, this is only coming in at 145.9 grams, and that's kind of right in the mid-weight sweet spot, and I'll talk about it more as we go through the video, but I think this really has balanced out well, and I think they overall spec this across the board nicely for the style of watch. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a deeper dive into the watch itself. First, looking at the colors. Each of these are going to have color accents that complement them. The one we're looking at today is the blue variant, but there's also a white that has a nice rose accent. There's a salmon dial, a gray dial, and then they actually did unlock. This was Kickstarter stretch goals, but they have a green and a purple that they have unlocked as well. So you have a bounty of options that are available. Each of these, you're going to notice, has a layered texture to the dial. So the most signature feature of this is not only the accent colors with that GMT disc in the middle, which of course, that, as a spoiler there, is a GMT disc. That's why you have the 24-hour markings. So in lieu of a fourth hand, that disc actually rotates around, and that's how you're going to get your GMT time. As is traditional, they did a day and night coloration on each of the variants, and each of those are going to be suited to the individual watch colorway. The layering, though, doesn't stop there. While you have the disc in the middle, and it has to, of course, be recessed down into the dial, it then steps out on the perimeter. You've got a nice satiny color and finish for that on each of these respective, and then it does step up to a rehaut out on the perimeter as well. So there's a lot of depth that's going on with this watch, and I really think it is attractive in the total packaging, but we'll talk about that significantly more as we go through. This does have printing on the dial. At the 12 o'clock position, you're going to notice the Batavi as well as Amsterdam below that, where they're housed. And then down at the 6 o'clock position, you will see Geograaf, as well as you're going to see the Worldtimer notation. Shifting out on the perimeter, you can see that it does have the individual minute and second hashes, so you don't lose legibility there. And then out on the rehaut itself, you do have printing of the Worldtimer feature, where you'll have various cities throughout the world that are featured. Shifting over to the hardware, the handset on this is going to be what I would describe as a syringe style, though it's not a typical design there, for it has some little nuances and it is a custom set. But overall, syringe configuration for both the hour and minute hand. The second hand has a nice legibility tip with a arrow pointed out there. As for the markers themselves, the markers are going to be rectangles. They shifted up, instead of being polished, they actually have brushing on those. What you will note, though, is they do have facets on the end, which makes them, I think, much more, not only for light play, but just in general, I think it adds more depth and more attraction to that, and it really kind of takes you in from the outer perimeter with the higher layers down to that inner ring and disc in the center, which I think is a nice touch. Each of these, the handset as well as the markers, has BGW9 lume applied to that. And I think it's a solid application for what it is. Certainly it's not going to be what I would call a lume monster, but that being said, I found that it performs plenty adequately. There are also nice little touches of both the sun and moon on that inner disc. I will say that's more a novelty than anything else. It does fade very quickly. It takes a UV to really charge it up, in my opinion, and even then it fades out of legibility very quickly. And functionally, because the hours themselves aren't loomed, it really is just an accent, but I think it's a cool touch. Shifting back to the bezel. So the bezel on the exterior, the outer bezel, you can see is a fixed construction. As we already talked about, it is flush. It has a nice step to that. And what you'll see is you have textural differences as well. You have a nice polished lip, and it is very cleanly polished. But then additionally, you're going to have a radial or a sunray kind of milling, or I should say brushing, that's going there. And you can see those lines radiating out from the middle. So nice touch, and I think that gives good contrast overall. As far as the case has, I would say, a nice smooth flow to it. The case shape on this, as you can see here, it does have a downturn, but it's a relatively subtle downturn, so it doesn't wear flat by any means, but it's not particularly aggressive. It does sit slightly proud of the Caseback, as we'll talk about further, which if you have seen my prior reviews, you know I'm not necessarily a huge fan of, but I do think it has good lines overall, and I haven't found that it rides too high off of the wrist. As far as the finishing, you can see this is principally going to be a nice horizontal brushing running the length of the case, though again, it does have nice polished accents. The lugs from the side profile do have a nice curvature to those, so I think that's fairly aggressive and flows again nicely into the case construction. The lugs do have a pretty aggressive taper to them, so as you're looking from the aerial view there, you can get a snapshot of that. Shifting over to the opposite crown side, so can't say the crown side in this case since we have crowns on both sides, but the 3 o'clock side here, you can see there are on neither side integrated crown guards, which I think again is in keeping with the overall construction. And speaking of the crowns, we do have them housed at both the 3 o'clock and the 10 o'clock position, and we'll talk about those functionally in just a moment. Both of them are measuring in at 5.8 millimeters. They do differ as far as the function. So the 3 o'clock crown, this one is a screw down construction. The 10 o'clock crown, however, is not, and it's not a push-pull either. It's actually fixed, though it does rotate, as we can check out here. So as you can see, that's how you're going to adjust for your Worldtimer as far as the layout as you set your time for what you want your principal time zone to be. And that's, I think, really what all of us are looking for in a Worldtimer, is having that kind of functionality. Really adds to the GMT function, in my opinion. The 3 o'clock crown, again, is going to be screw down for that one. The milling on both is what I would describe as like a coin edge style milling, though again, because it's a fixed bezel, it does not need to match there, but I think it fits the overall styling of the watch well, and I think it does align nicely with that brushing that's right next to that. The crowns are both going to be polished on the exterior, and you can see we have the Batavi B on the 3 o'clock for signature, and then additionally we have a nice globe right there on the 10 o'clock for being signed as well. As far as the Caseback, the Caseback is going to be a screw-in construction. Additionally, it is, as you can see, an exhibition Caseback, and it houses what I found to be a fairly attractively decorated movement. I'm not sure if this is a higher grade or if that's how they come standard, but overall, between the Geneva striping as well as the machine turning, I think it's a good-looking movement. I've been pleased with that. I wouldn't mind if they did a little bit of custom branding on the rotor, but I really don't think that it needs it. Keeping a fairly sterile configuration, I think, gives a clean look, and because it's so nicely decorated, it's still attractive to look at. As far as the finishing, this has a mix of both polishing and blasting. The blasting, I think, is a good choice. I think it really helps to add contrast, and that text legibility is crystal clear, sharp, and I think looks nice overall. As far as the bracelet on this is going to taper from 20 millimeters at the lugs down to 18 millimeters at the clasp. It does feature a female end link, which gives a nice drape across the wrist, and we'll look at the articulation momentarily. The construction is going to be H-link, and with the center of those H-links, the couplers, those are going to be polished, whereas the rest of it keeps with that linear brushing as you run down the length and it butts nicely against the case and lugs. The bracelets are held together with screws, and we will have a note on that in a moment. As far as the clasp is going to be a milled traditional double pusher construction, no fold over, and it is signed with the Batavi namesake. On the perimeter, it does have 4 micro adjust holes, so you have plenty of size capability there. As we already talked about, there is a quick release spring bar, or are quick release spring bars on the back of the bracelet. In case you do want to change those out, it's nice and easy to do. As for the articulation, I found with these small links, with this H-link construction, with the lateral play that is available in this bracelet, that it's quite comfortable, and the drape in articulation is pretty excellent. It folds almost completely flush with the case back, and additionally, it really just hugs and drapes over the wrist. Perfect weight, great balance overall. I've been very pleased with that. Alright, so now that we have a better feel for the watch itself and its intricacies, let's go ahead and take a look at just some relative comps here. First, for GMT style, this is the Zelos Horizons. This is a 40 millimeter, but you can see just how much more dial presence, despite the 39 millimeter size, how much more dial presence the Batavi has than this Horizons. Bringing in another Batavi, this gives you an idea as far as the coloration in case you want to see this next to purple. Absolutely gorgeous color. Love this one. Think it's so attractive, though I'm very much a fan of this blue and green color combo as well. And then here, as far as the link, this kind of gives a corollary. You can see a similar style for the link where you have the brush and the polish. This is on the Dorenzo DRZ04. And to me, this takes definitely some inspiration from this style overall. All right, so now that we have all that out of the way, let's go ahead and kind of wrap things up with my personal view of the positives, some critiques, and there are some, as well as the overall summary. First, for the positives. The Worldtimer function, as I already alluded to earlier, if you're going to have a GMT watch, to me, Worldtimer's where it's at. It just makes it so easy to tell time pretty much anywhere you're at in the world. All you need to know is the corollary for the city, if it's not one of the cities that's listed, which I think is a heck of a lot easier than having to actually do the true conversions. So that's great, but we'll have a note with that. The design itself, I think, is gorgeous. I think it's a classic style to this. The case, it is certainly not boring by any means. It has a heck of a lot going on. The dial, some might find to be a little busy. I don't think at all. I think it's actually exactly what you would want and expect out of a Worldtimer. And the overall packaging, I just think is excellently done, and I love the colorways. Each of them, it's really hard to pick because they're all so attractive, both the base colors and the accent colors that go along with it. The comfort has been fantastic, as we've already talked about ad nauseum with the bracelet articulation, the flex that's there, the balancing, I think, especially on this bracelet, I think is extremely well balanced, not taxing or heavy on the wrist at all, and really just feels like it's made to be worn. I haven't noticed it. I've worn this for days straight, and I haven't noticed it on wrist pretty much at all, which is a good thing, except when it catches my eye, and that's an even better thing. As far as the execution, especially for being a prototype, there are some things we'll talk about that need to be cleaned up, but the execution, I found to be fantastic. The brushing is clean, the polishing is clean. Overall, I think it is a nice execution, and I think it bodes well for what you can expect from the production version. And as for the pricing, as of time of publishing, this is available on Kickstarter for $700, which with the movement, with the overall packaging, with the style, with the GMT, I really don't think it's a bad price at all. I think that's very reasonable. I would have liked to have gotten this live when they had it for $650. For the super early bird, maybe one of those will pop back up at the tail end here, but I think even at $700, it's definitely a very good deal. But that's not to say there aren't any critiques. As for the critiques, the bezel markings. This is a pretty critical oversight here, but it has already been addressed. Unfortunately, with the prototypes, they were actually printed in reverse. So when you see New York and LA, just as an example, 3-hour differential there, LA is actually 3 hours behind, not 3 hours ahead. So the way that rotates through, unfortunately, when you're looking at the hours, that should actually be over here. They have already fixed that. So on the production, no worries there. That will be addressed and already has been addressed. So that will be the correct order all the way around. So you will be able to time off of that and use the Worldtimer function like you'd want. The crown stiffness. We already showed some of the movement here. I've got to say it's hit and miss, but the crown is a little bit stiffer on the 10 o'clock crown, a little bit stiffer one direction than it is for the other. It has seemed to loosen up even in my use, so it might just be some binding or some grit that was in there. And again, it's a prototype, but they have let me know that they did actually replace the gearing, or upgrade the gearing, I should say, so it will be even smoother action, though I really don't think it's too bad at the outset, but something I wanted to note. The bracelet screws, trying to be cognizant of many people complaining about screw bracelets backing out. What they actually did was they kicked the threads in further, and what that does is holds a little better for that. However, a side effect is that actually will, when you unscrew this, the head doesn't clear very much. So I had to, when I was adjusting, put a pin tool through, which you should already have for your micro adjust anyways, but put a pin tool through there and then just push it out. Very minor item, just something that I did want to note. The lug drop, as I already alluded to earlier, I would like to see the Caseback slimmed out. I'd actually prefer that over dropping the lugs further. Even if that meant that they took it down to 100 meters of water resistance, I personally think that'd be preferable. I don't think it's too thick overall, as it is at under 13 millimeters, including that dome crystal, but I just think it would nest a little nicer into the wrist, and I think it would fit into the classy style of this watch. So that'd be a nice touch there. Harden coating. If they're going to keep these polished links, which I would not be opposed to them going over to brushed links all the way around, though I don't mind the look as is, but to me it is absolutely a must that they need to have the hardened coating on with just all that polished area, so you don't get the scratches and scuffs like you're seeing on this, and of course you're still going to have the fingerprints like you just saw there at the angle. But that being said, it's one of their stretch goals. I'm really hoping they achieve that, because I'd like to see that go into the production model. And then finally, for the clasp, I would love to see a toolless micro adjust. I've been spoiled by that. I hate having to use a tool to adjust the micro, but again, that's just a relatively minor thing. It's a preference, though I expect many of you share that preference as well. So where does that leave us? Prototype flaws and all, I've got to say, I absolutely love this total package. The colors are great, the function is great once the Worldtimer is corrected through there. Total, I think they just hit this one out of the park. So it is one that I would absolutely highly recommend. I think it's a great size, great function, great design overall. I think this is going to check a lot of boxes for most people. Whether you have a larger wrist, even with a smaller size, because of the classier style, a little bit of dress leaning for that, I still think you'll be happy. And if you have a small wrist, they made the proportions such that it's going to work equally well on small wrist and look just as classy overall. So this is one that I personally definitely want to add to my collection. Let me know what you think, though, down in the comments. Do you plan to pick one up? And if so, what color are you grabbing? So I hope this video has been helpful for you. If you did enjoy it, please do smash that like button. Additionally, if you haven't done so already, please tap that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.